What's up everyone, Matthew Moniz here, and this is the Moto G5, the perfect pick for those on a tight budget or the oh shit, I broke my expensive phone and need something to hold me over until my contract is done phone. Regardless of your situation, the price and quality of the Moto G5 is extremely attractive. So is it still the king of budget phones? Let's find out. It's about time that budget phones are starting to feel a lot more premium. There really isn't a need for cheap plastic flimsy phones anymore, especially with the cost of parts dropping in price. The Moto G5 is a step up in quality compared to last year's Moto G4. It still has plastic wrapping around the back, but in the middle is a metal sheet. It's a nice combination and really comfortable to hold. There's an audio jack on top, which is fine, but I prefer it to be on the bottom, and instead of using a USB Type-C port, Motorola has stuck with the now archaic micro USB instead. So last year the Moto G4 didn't have a fingerprint scanner, but if you've used the G4 Plus or even the Moto Z, they had a fingerprint scanner on the front that only acted as a fingerprint scanner. This meant you had to use the on-screen navigation buttons to get around. I complained that it would make a lot more sense to have capacitive buttons beside the scanner so you would save screen real estate. Well, Motorola didn't add capacitive buttons this year, but instead added gestures to the fingerprint scanner. So you can press it once to go home, swipe to the left to go back, and swipe it to the right to bring up the recent apps menu. It works well and a great alternative to using the on-screen buttons. There's no water resistance, only a water repellent coating, and that's fine. This is a budget phone after all. But there are two different models, one with 16 gigabytes of storage and 2 gigabytes of RAM, and the other with 32 gigabytes and 3 gigabytes of RAM. I wish the latter came here to Canada. 16 gigabytes just doesn't cut it anymore. Sure, you can use a micro SD card, but SD card storage is just not as fast as internal flash storage. Oh, and if you love using your phone to pay for things, well, you can't do that since there's no NFC. Sound quality is okay on the G5. It's using a mono speaker which is in the earpiece, so bonus points for it being front facing. But when you use the earpiece as a speaker, it's usually pretty weak. So even though the sound was clear, the volume is much lower compared to a mono speaker on most other phones. Surprisingly, the 5-inch 1080p Full HD IPS display is pretty good. It gets decently bright, has crisp colors, and nice contrast. It's smaller than last year's Moto G4, but overall a slight improvement. The glass on the front isn't Gorilla Glass, even though last year's version had it, so you'll have to be a bit more careful with scratches. So some of you may not know this, but last year's Moto G4 had a faster Snapdragon 617 processor. This year it's using the Snapdragon 430, which is actually slightly slower. Now, it's not a huge difference, but for those of you who have the G4, you won't see any performance improvement by upgrading to the G5. I wish they stuck 3 gigabytes of RAM in the 16 gigabyte model instead of 2. Even though it feels fluid moving around the UI, it starts to throttle when it's loading certain parts of more demanding web pages. I fear that everything is running great for the most part right now, but down the road the phone might feel a bit too sluggish. But it is a good thing Motorola still lets stock Android take over the entire phone. Seriously, I have to commend Motorola for always keeping things clean while providing a few nice gestures that actually provide value. So all the usual suspects are here, like chop twice for the flashlight, twist your wrist for the camera, some call gestures, and the fingerprint scanner stuff I mentioned earlier. The 13 megapixel rear-facing f2.0 camera fits nicely with its price point. Now, it's not good enough to compete with a flagship device, and it's not really supposed to, but it's definitely good enough to get a good photo in great lighting. But where it really falls apart, like most cameras at this price point, is under low light or indoors. Same holds true for the front-facing 5 megapixel camera. The battery size is pretty good for a 5-inch phone. It's 2800 milliamps. I was able to get a full day's use comfortably, but you'll probably still want to plug it in to charge every single night. There's no wireless charging, but you do have turbocharging to top things up pretty quickly. Alright, so here's my closing thoughts. Motorola continues to offer some of the best budget smartphone experiences on the market. The new Moto G5 does this again by improving the build quality, offering a good display, a decent camera, and gesture controls that are usually found on more expensive smartphones. The battery life is fine, but not as good as other budget or mid-range offerings, and the performance is slightly worse than the Moto G4. I really wish they stuck 3 gigabytes of RAM in the baseline model. So here's the bottom line. If you have the Moto G4, don't upgrade. You won't see much of a difference. However, if you're looking for a budget smartphone or even a phone to use while traveling, this one is my top pick. For my American friends, the G5 is not available, but you do have the G5 Plus, which is even better. So that wraps up my review of the Moto G5. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments below. And if you have one already, let me know you like or dislike about it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. And as always, I will see you in the next video.